couple questions more on the journalistic side of things. For you, what makes someone a good journalist?
I think listening is a really important skill that it's taken me a while to really learn how to do that properly. An interview is good so basically when you sit down and do an interview, the first 10-15 minutes are often worthless because the person needs to settle. And it depends on the circumstances around how you've met them and stuff, but if you're sitting down having a coffee with someone, they need to settle, and it's usually about half an hour, 45 minutes in, and you're always under time constraints as a journalist. That's when the good stuff happens. But it's more, I have a tendency, or would have previously had a tendency, to interject. I wouldn't like silences, but I've found that you really need to sit with someone, give them time, and often they will then, once they're comfortable and they have the space and the silence to speak about whatever it is they're talking about, then they will tell you what's going on. And in that regard, one thing I really disliked during COVID was how I wasn't meeting up with people for interviews, because honestly, you can't compare an interview done face-to-face versus an interview done over Zoom. I had to do all my interviews over Zoom for a new Paris series I was doing, and even that I had no real rapport with the people I interviewed during that period, whereas previous COVID and post-COVID, until I moved on from the series, I would have really developed relationships with people that I would have contacted them afterwards for other stuff. And then I think about, like, in the last year and a half, I'm back from maternity leave about a year and a half, that the stories I've worked on, the longer features where I go and meet people, I have made connections with them, and then you revisit them with other stories. So I guess this is a long-winded way of saying listening and meeting people and just making that human connection are key to what I would consider good journalism. Obviously, there is really important journalism that's done around data, around FOIs, cold calling, politicians. But the part of journalism that I get the most out of, and the one that I find most fulfilling, and that I think that a lot of people really appreciate, is that humanity. And that is a connection that can, I feel, only be built through person to person and really hearing someone.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question from one of our Stand News contributors, and they ask, as a journalist who's focused on migration, how do you navigate the balance between presenting objective facts but also advocating for causes and opinions that you might deeply care about or support?
We've kind of touched on this already, and it is something I struggle with, because I do feel very, very strongly about some of the stuff that I write on, and I think my work maybe 8-9 years ago, my allegiances might have been clearer in the way that I wrote, but I think it's so important to produce objective news, because if I can't provide objective news about the immigration cause, who am I to say that someone writing about the far right, who sides with the far right, isn't within their rights to do that, because they believe what these people are saying? So objectivity is the core. And I mean, if you look, I remember when I first started becoming interested in journalism, seriously interested in my early 20s, I was reading a lot from journalists, kind of in the journalists around in the 40s, 50s, 60s, and it's a basic tenet of journalism, but it comes back to it all the time, that objectivity is what it's all about. And I think we have we have quotes up on the wall in the Irish Times, actually, they've been there for years, but they're actually quite inspiring. And again, they bring it back to that as well. So we're all human beings, journalists. We vote, we have political preferences, most of us vote, I would hope all of us vote. We have values, we have our personal life, we have challenges in our own lives, we have struggles with whether it's the health system or bureaucracy. So we view the world with and we all have our own upbringings in this world, so we bring our own baggage to the job. And for instance, as I said, I come from a background where my grandfather was a refugee, so I did come with a certain lens, and I have to be cautious about that. It's an ongoing task. I'm always learning and I'm always trying, and I think that is also a beauty of journalism. Whenever I have days when I'm like, I want to pack it in, I then step back and I look at the job I have versus jobs that some of my friends would have, who earn very well now, who we all would have graduated at the same time, and they'd be earning far more than I earn now. But my job is constantly evolving, and I'm constantly learning, and back to the people element, I meet so many people through my job, and there's a real beauty in that.
Absolutely. I would love to hear how journalism and being a journalist has maybe shaped your values and beliefs and way of life, and maybe ways of communicating with the world.
Yeah, in so many ways, I guess. Where do I start with that? you meet so many people who have had struggles beyond anything I thought was possible. I recently edited a collection of stories for it's called it's called Trinity Tales. They've done them for each decade of students who have come out of Trinity, and I did them for the early 2000s, and I was somewhat reluctant to do it at the beginning because I felt like, oh, Trinity students come across as being very privileged. And anyway, I did it with a lovely woman called Katie Dixon, and we produced this final product where we really went out there and tried to find an array of different types of stories to show that there was diversity within Trinity. But when I was writing the intro to the book, I admitted that I was very much protected by a bubble of privilege when I was in Trinity. And I think my working life since then has really transformed many of the core beliefs I had then. I'm still the same person. I still have the same values in many ways, but I've seen a reality that I didn't really understand 15, 16, 17 years ago. I guess that's life experience as well, but that's my work bringing me into contact with people who have suffered extreme violence, hardship, women who have suffered sexual violence. I've worked on projects overseas where I've seen poverty beyond anything, and I think it's made me into a more whole human being. I don't know if it's made me into a better human. I think that would be patting myself on the back when I don't deserve it. But I think my ability to question has also only improved as I've gone on. So I'm far more skeptical about the world. I haven't lost my idealism, I don't think. I think it's very important to say that because I think a lot of people do lose their idealism as they grow older. And it sometimes is hard to hold on to it when you see systems fail repeatedly, when you see people refusing or totally unable to understand the human element of, let's talk for example about the asylum system in Ireland and how it has been broken for so long, and how some people still cannot understand the humanity that's connected with it. So I think you can't not grow with, I think everyone grows with their profession, but I think journalism you grow quite drastically in many ways. But then if you spoke to me 20 years ago when I was finishing school, I think there's a lot of me that's still there. I found a letter that I wrote to myself when I was 17, and when I was clearing some stuff out recently, and it was quite emotional reading it. But the values that I laid out in that letter, they still stand, and I still feel very strongly about all those things that I wrote more than 20 years ago.
Amazing. We have another question from a different contributor who asks, how can we use journalism as a tool in representing marginalized communities? And also, what challenges do you face in the endeavor to represent?
It's such an important tool because it gives them a voice, quite simply. It gives, and I'm looking at some of the faces that are on your wall here in the stand office, and I know I'm looking directly at Eileen Flynn here, who has done such incredible work, and her appearance in the media, and I know that my colleague Kitty Holland has spoken to her a lot over the years. She brought the voice of the travelling community, particularly women in the travelling community, to a whole new level through appearing in the media. But it takes a lot of strength and courage to do that. What was the second part of that question?
What challenges do you face in the process of representing?
You're dealing with the challenges of a newsroom. You're dealing with, and this is a daily struggle, you're dealing with editors who don't like, they don't like too much touchy-feely stuff. They want hard news, they want political lines, they want... and it is a generalization, but I find it to be true that women journalists do bring more, maybe it's unfair to men to say it, but I'm going to say it, empathy to the writing that we do a lot of the time. Not all women, and I think sometimes that's not viewed as hard news enough and hard line enough, and it doesn't make always the front page news. And I know front page has lost a lot of its meaning, but it's still, the front page is a real statement. So I'm constantly fighting for a lot of my stories to make it into the paper and to be disseminated. Every now and again, it continues to happen. It doesn't matter how long you're in the job. I had a piece I wrote a few weeks ago that I put a good bit of time into, and it wasn't published, but it was taken apart and was used in a different article out of context for what I've written, and that just happens. And then what you were hoping to present wasn't presented in the way that you wanted. So it is a constant struggle. Struggle is not it's not difficult, but it's part of the job that you are an advocate for what you're writing about. And I think particularly when it comes to issues like immigration, when they are in the Dáil and being discussed, or there's some massive protest out in Pollak, yes, then there's massive interest. But a lot of the time you're fighting your corner to make sure that your editor is interested in what you want to write.
Yeah, totally. What would you say are some ways that students, journalists, or advocates can communicate and inform others about their advocacy work?
So students, what was the list?
Students, aspiring journalists, and advocates.
I'd separate them up, because aspiring journalists should really, going back to what I was saying before, learning to bring their objectivity into the work that they do. Advocates for a cause, they're bringing a passion to it, which is hugely important. So I would say, with regards, these are all passion projects, these different elements of life developing beyond university. It's dedication, it's time, it's interest, it's reading. I was actually speaking at an event a few days ago and someone asked about skills that you can develop as a journalist. Read newspapers, read books, read fiction, but read, because if you don't read of what other people are writing, you're never going to be a good writer. It's just, I really don't think it's possible for anyone to write if they're not reading other people. So, and just recognize as well that you're never going to, it's never going to be perfect. It's a constantly evolving role. And I say that with regards to journalism, but with advocacy, issues are changing all the time. They're developing. Their position in society changes based on where that society is going, and how they're perceived by politicians, by the general public, by the general voting public. So it's I hope that makes sense. But dedication, time, listening, informing yourself.
Absolutely. You've already spoken a bit about this, but my final question for you is, what advice do you have to either students or aspiring journalists in starting a career in journalism?
As I said, reading. Don't listen to the people who say journalism, number one, is dying, because everyone's been saying that forever. I remember sitting when I was working in London, I was kind of moving from basically couch surfing, because I couldn't really afford to rent in London, and I was staying with friends of my parents, and the dad kind of chuckled when he heard that I was trying to be a journalist. He's like, "It's a waste of your time." There's always going to be people who say that, so ignore it. But also, journalism, I really do believe journalism is more important today than it ever was. And there's a lot of bad journalists out there. There's a lot of sensational journalists out there. There's a lot of journalists out there who just want to want to have a top line and don't care about the implications and repercussions for the people they're writing about. I sometimes think I bring too much of myself into my work, and as a result I suffer a bit because I worry a lot about the people I write about, and that's not always a healthy thing, because you need to disconnect. It's really important to disconnect. But so I also would say, if you are getting into this field, like, learn to disconnect from it. I mean, in your 20s, it's a really brilliant time to live it and breathe it. And I travelled with journalism and I did so much work. And one of the things I'm struggling with at the moment is finding that new life balance between bringing up a child and continuing my job, because journalism can be all consuming. But at that early part in your career, it's about not losing faith, working hard. There will be times where you may have to work in other industries, and then you can just write articles now and again. I've been very lucky in my career, and I really don't want to, I never lose sight of that, but a lot of it I think was I was in the right place at the right time. I met a journalist in London who got me a job in The Guardian, who got me a job somewhere else. A job came up in the Irish Times at the right time. So a sequence of events led me to where I was, but it's not always easy to get contracts. It's almost impossible to get staff jobs. But it's a fascinating profession. It's constantly evolving, and it is so important in a world where people like Trump, like Musk, like Netanyahu are spouting what is effectively lies, but people don't see them as such. So it is the role of the journalist to really get in there and just lay it all out for people to make informed decisions. So my advice would be, if you really want to do it, go for it, and don't lose the faith. And the imposter syndrome will never go. You'll always question, should I be here? Should I be with these people? But dedicate yourself, and it's worthwhile.